5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Lothraxian, give up this foolishness! We have already won!
You put all of Silvermoon in danger! This isn't worth the risk! There seem to be a few pieces missing. We have to find them.
Pylon is showing a critical failure, Chief Conrad.
Hurry up those repairs! If we aren't careful, that will be all of us!
Bloodlust. I need to replace
More of you mindless
Watch. Move. Watch. Move. Watch.
but another prototype!
Watch. Move.
My power output is peaking!
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Watch. Move.
بوست دیگه 21 MPX اومدم. وای که چقدر از من چون باره کردم.
Watch. Watch. AoE.
دیکه یه آنتی ماجیک شل درست نکشه.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Watch. Move. Watch. Potion ready. Watch. Move. AoE. Five, four, three, two, one. External. Move. External. Watch. Move. Watch.
آرنجی اصلا با اون مهربون نبود این باس.
Move. AoE.
چه خبره خوبید؟ مخلصیم مخلصیم در 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 در.
Realize I was right, Illyria. Your judgment has been clouded by the void, as it always does.
My vision has never been clearer, Lothraxian, but I don't want to believe it.
I'm out of range. Plunge. AoE. AoE.
عده مرده هنوز بافش رو مونه. بیلزارد عالیه.
Dodge. AoE. Dodge.
اشتباهی پارالیز کردم.
Dodge.
What a miserable display! You have all failed in your purpose! Is there no end to you intruders? Do us all a favor and die before I have to kill you myself!
آف استریم دیدم خیلی راحتم، نیاز ندارم سیستم بگیرم. احتمالش هست اصلا سیزن بعدی کلا زیاد لایو نشم، نخوام پول سیستم بدم. بقیه چیزایی که نیاز دارم رو بگیرم، به تامین نام برسم. احتمالا سیزن بعدی فقط ویدیو براتون بذارم یوتیوب چیزی باشه، احتمالا لایو نمیشم کلا. چون واقعا 300 میلیون ببین من تو 7 سالی که کانتنت کریتور بودم بچا 200 تومن هم دونیت نشدم تو 7
Bloodlust
سال.
ready.
خب اصلا برام چیز منطقی نیست بیام 300 تومن هزینه کنم حداقل که
Dodge.
بخوام برا مثلا کانتنت باشه برا ویور. که از دلایلی که دیگه کلا ویدیوهای آموزشی فری هم قطع کردم همین بوده. امروز چند تا بوست اومدم تو همین دانجنا، دیدم خیلی راحت بودم مفصل. آریار آرمز دادش، من تازه اومدم تو چت.
Potion ready.
جواب این سوالم کنم 60 بار تا حالا دادم حداقل این یه هفته‌ای که رد شده بعد از آخرین ترینینگ.
I do everything myself! Yet another battle! I am still wounded from the last one.
Spread.
اشبات همو نگه می‌داشتم.
There will be no end to your
Fangs.
Eliminate these intruders or be devoured!
Spread. Intermission.
There will be no end to your suffering!
Damaging. Bloodlust.
That damn Nacrazine!
Four, three, two, one.
من دیوار شیلدشو نگه داشته واسه چی؟
Spread.
تو بایره دیگه انتظاری نمیده.
Ants. Spread. Intermission. Damage amp.
تانک بدیه.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
خیلی بد دفنسیو میزنه.
Spread.
مثلا اینجا تو بالاترش هم کوکون نیاز نمیشه. برای تانک.
Ads. Spread.
بارک ردی چیت شد. برو بریم.
Intermission. Damage amp.
I simply
آها
lasted a little longer.
4, 3, 2.
واقعا عالی. واقعا عالی.
Spread.
صد درصد یه چی مصرف کرده. این تانک 100% درانکه.
Potion ready.
این تانک 100% درانکه. اصلا فاجعه دف میکشید. 100% یه چی مصرف. صد درصد یه چی مصرف کرده بود. اصلا خیلی بد دفنسیو میکشید. دیدم به چشم خودم دیگه. خواستیم وایسیم بزنیم ولی اذیتمون میکنه. جلوترم قطعا داستان میشه. اینجوری نمیشه.
skipped, and maybe my experiences throughout the duration of the PTR. I've put in probably over 100 dungeon runs on the PTR, so I'm fairly experienced in regards to what's going to be happening. And we're going to be talking
Potion
about the
ready.
tech, we're going to be talking about the tips, we're going to be talking about the tricks, we're going to be talking about everything that you need to know for this season's dungeons. And now with this being the case, a lot of times there are some add-ons or weak auras that I've previously kind of given out to people or recommended some packs for some dungeons. This season, EX Boss was very instrumental in Season 1. I did message the creator of EX Boss and X-Win Tools and was asking about like what's going on with the Season 2 update. He basically went on to say that while he thinks it's possible to return EX Boss to what it was in Season 1, at the same time, he's been having a little bit of problems due to Blizzard's add-on restrictions. So if you're looking for an EX Boss profile, I'm going to get it to you the moment that it's available, but as it currently stands, I don't have any additional add-on resources for this season's Mythic Plus dungeons. And another common trend that we're actually seeing this season as well is that this is actually a fairly low-tech season. There's not that many snaps. There's not that many like weird skips that you should be looking to do. Obviously, tech evolves as the season goes on, and you find out new and weird strategies, which will be covered on this channel. But as a whole, this does seem like it's a fairly low-tech season. And if you enjoy Mythic Plus content or just World of Warcraft content in general, please leave this video a subscribe. Obviously, it's a pretty big deal for me as it helps me continue to get sponsors in the future. And with that intro being the case, let's talk about today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Boot.dev. Now, every single one Now, jumping into the dungeons, we're going to start off by talking about King's Rest. I would say that King's Rest is very different than old King's Rest from Battle for Azeroth, where a lot of the mobs have received reworks. If you remembered old King's Rest in any capacity, well, first off, welcome. You're old as me. But secondly, it's not really that similar. There's lots of reworks for the mobs. First major thing that you need to know is that there's not that many mobs that are skippable in this dungeon. As you can see on screen right here through MDT, you can only skip 1 or 2 mobs throughout the entirety of the dungeon. It makes pathing fairly straightforward. There's not a ton of options. I will say you're going to play a very similar route at the beginning of the season as you're going to likely to play at the end of the season. But that's just the pathing for this dungeon. So talking about some of the mobs, especially in the first area that you're going to have to watch out for. First off, you're going to encounter a mob called Minions of Zool. These mobs are kind of annoying, where they have a shield on themselves, and if they ever contact a player, they fear you. So the way that you deal with them is you can either purge them, you can mass dispel them, you could potentially even turn evil them as well with an AoE fear turn evil cast that will actually stop them from fixating players, and that ends up breaking the tether. It ends up killing them off. The alternative is what? You just kind of get feared and you drop a Tremor Totem. The Minions of Zool aren't great. They're kind of annoying, but if you have a purge in this dungeon, they're fairly trivial. Now, the first pull of this dungeon that players do, it does about 1 billion damage. You end up pulling these
وبکم آف کنم که طرف رو ببینید. چیزا رو آف کنم. لحظه.
massive golems, and whenever these golems
چیز خاصی نیست واقعا بخوام داداش بهت بگم حقیقت غیر از اینکه پیووه نگاه کن لاگ چک کن در DPS پلی دادن آیتم هم نیاز داره بعد یه جوری بازی کنی که بتونی رید هم بخری حقیقت نه
HP, they start pulsing on you for AoE. A lot of players have actually recently started doing these constructs into the first boss room with a pack, which then allows you to skip the purification construct halfway through the Machimba hallway. That's also a viable strategy. So if you're looking and thinking about potential skips or potential routing considerations, that's something that some of the absolute highest groups have been doing. And so they'll pull the constructs from the first pull into the boss room. Now, a lot of the trash in this first boss room, it's not that difficult. You can kind of YOLO it. There are some mobs that put up a shield. There are some mobs that occasionally enrage. But realistically, the trash in the first room is not that hard. First boss, the Golden Serpent. Now, the Golden Serpent, it puts dots out periodically on players, and it also does big pulsing AoE damage for 4 or 5 hits. That's a majority of the damage intake consideration whenever you're thinking about the healer, is making sure that the players who get the dots out get some triage healing, some targeted healing onto their players to where they are able to be top deck up. Then, whenever you have the dot out on your player, this goes out onto 2 players. Whenever the debuff expires, you will drop gold puddles that spawn slimes. You want to really stack up these puddles. You want to kill off the slimes and not let them contact the boss. Otherwise, it will shield the boss. So that's kind of the general gameplay pattern of the Golden Serpent. A fairly straightforward encounter. Then, after you end up killing off the first boss, you have a forced trash gauntlet, which is fairly easy, so we're not going to really worry about that for too long. Then you have a purification construct. This guy guards the bridge. If you play him, just know that he is going to be doing a massive slam, which does big AoE damage. He is skippable with Shadow Meld and some kind of finesse, especially if you're, you got your Wurnstone, or you got your Shadow Meld, you got your Infernal Strike, you got your Heroic Leap. This guy is skippable. We've actually seen some teams electing to skip him on the PTR just because he does an insane amount of group damage. But also because during the Machimba boss room, there's internment constructs and slimes that do some AoE damage to you, so you can't really pull the purification construct into it. And so by skipping this purification construct, it actually allows you to save a pretty significant amount of time. Now, the internment constructs, they will entomb you, and whenever you get entombed, it actually puts you in the nearest tomb. So it's something that's fairly predictable. If you're a tank, you can actually kind of herd your sheep of DPS to about where you want them, to where you can immediately click on the tomb and be able to get that player out. But if you have the internment constructs pulled and then Machimba then gets pulled, this will make the internment construct just spam a drain fluid cast. This can be beneficial in some situations. Say the internment construct's at 10% or 15%, and you're going to get another entomb. You would rather not lose the damage from that player going into the entomb, and instead you'll just maybe pull Machimba. It's a little bit of upfront damage that your healer has to deal with, but it's okay. Now, talking about Machimba himself, he has one cast that's actually very dangerous. He's got a Drain Fluid ability. This is an ability that is able to be melded. It does a lot of target. It's a very hard-hitting targeted channel. There's another couple of things that you need to know about Machimba. He spawns mummies occasionally that must be kicked. Failure to kick these puts a disease on the entire group. Very dangerous. The dot is quite dangerous. And then he also does, similar to the Internment Construct, he also does an Entomb cast. It's not like the Internment Construct where it's the nearest tomb where you're going to get entombed. It's one of the random 4 tombs across the room. If you end up clicking the wrong tomb, you'll also spawn additional mummies. Some groups don't care. Say you're playing with the Prop Paladin, that guy's just going to Avenger Shield them anyways, but it can be something that's kind of annoying if you're not careful. So, we down Machimba. Now we're moving on to the next section, the bridge area, where only a couple of mobs are relevant. The first mob that's relevant is a shaman. He's a spectral shaman. He summons healing tide totems. If you do not kill these totems quickly, it will heal the pack to full. It has like an infinite range in terms of the healing. These totems don't have a ton of health, but they need to be focused down as quickly as possible. That's probably the main mob that's on this bridge that's very dangerous. So, say we kill off the bridge, now we make it to the next boss, the Council of Tribes, where this boss is always going to be in the same order. The order is Kula the Butcher first. What she does is she does a Severing Axe cast, and she spawns some Beyblades on the ground periodically. Getting hit by the Beyblade is going to kill you. The Severing Axe is a dot that your healer has to watch out for. Next up, we have Akali the Conqueror. Akali the Conqueror has a group soak. This group soak is meldable, feign deathable, and invisible by like mages. You can also vanish it if you're a rogue or whatever. If for some reason you're playing a rogue in your group. And, you know, dropping combat on that group soak just saves you a decent amount of group damage. It's also able to be bopped as well if you're playing with Paladin. The other mechanic that Akali the Conqueror has is the debilitating backhand, which whenever that contacts the tank, that gives the tank a vulnerability. Historically, the tanks have kited, although I will say this season on the PTR, tanks have not really respected this debilitating backhand ability, so it's maybe not something that you'll always have to kite, or it might be a situation where, depending on your defensives, you can stand and face tank the boss, even with the backhand debuff on you. Third boss on the Council of Tribes is Xanazal the Wise, and this guy's kind of the hardest, where every so often he summons 3 totems. The only totem that really matters is the Explosive Totem. That needs to be killed off before the cast resolves, otherwise you're going to wipe. The Thundering Totem and the Torrent Totem don't really do anything. They passively get cleaved down. You just drag the boss over them, and your DPS will end up cleaving them down. Council of Tribes, fairly easy encounter, though. It just has 3 bosses that, knowing the mechanics is going to be a big part of the battle there. Then we make it to the most iconic mob in this entire dungeon, Shadow of Zul, where Shadow of Zul has 2 minions of Zul that get spawned by circles that occasionally go on to players. There's also going to be a puddle that ends up spawning that needs to be soaked. There are 2 soaks. Now, there were previously only 1 soak during the PTR. Maybe I only have footage of when there was 1 soak. But there's going to be 2 soaks that are on the ground that need to be obtained. The tank is very likely to stand in one of the puddles, especially moving the mini-boss into melee. And it will also summon fear mobs at the exact same time. This creates a pretty easy wipe condition. Shadow of Zul no longer does insane amounts of tank damage. The healer actually has to out-heal the dots that go onto random players as opposed to it just blasting the tank. But again, the wipe condition is there are going to be 2 soaks and fear mobs spawning at the same time, so you have to be really careful. Like, the minions of Zul are kind of back, and so again, having the purge is quite valuable. So you kill off Shadow of Zul, and now you're moving on to Dazar, the final boss of the dungeon. He's got 2 raptors, Raban and Tazala, and these raptors share health with Dazar. The second raptor actually spawns at 80% health on the boss, where depending on what you're cleaving off of, occasionally you'll have 2 raptors out at the same time. Sometimes you'll have a Raban killed off first. Now, Raban has an AoE fear cast, and it needs to be kicked. It's a physical damage fear. It's actually very bad if that ends up going off. Dazar also has insane tank damage with an ability called Blade Combo. This, early on during PTR cycles, was killing off tanks very easy. It's not as hard now, but at the same time, it's still something that you need to be watching out for if you're a tank. A couple other mechanics that are notable on Dazar. He has an ability called Quaking Leap, where he always leaps towards the furthest player first. This can be dodged with any movement effects. He has another ability called Gilded Destruction, where he summons javelins from the sky. Gilded Destruction is always baited on top of the boss for the most amount of javelins. Tanks should ideally ping where they're going to go after the Gilded Destruction cast resolves. That way your ranged and your melee know where the boss is going to be dragged to allow you to have 100% melee uptime. The boss also does this cringe frontal cleave on his melee attacks during the Gilded Destruction. So if you're a melee DPS or potentially even a range that's running in front of the boss, watch out because you're going to get cleaved by a frontal. Okay, so that's King's Rest. I would say King's Rest is actually on the easier end in terms of damage intake, and so I wouldn't be shocked if this is one of the easier dungeons that we see on this season. All right, moving on to Ruby Life Pools. Now, Ruby Life Pools, similar to King's Rest, has pretty significant count restrictions where you can skip up to 4-ish mobs and a dragon, or like 9 mobs total. It obviously depends on your count a little bit, but there's like only a couple of mobs that you can skip inside of this dungeon. Now, Blizzard did recently make the Stormbringers and Thunderhead on the upper ring, making the Stormbringers give a little bit more count and making Thunderhead a little bit less lethal. Those mobs are all a little bit less lethal, so it's possible that my experiences may be a bit different than yours. But in my experiences, Thunderhead and Stormbringers were both very illegal for pretty much the entirety of the PTR. But since they got nerfed, it may change things where people are playing a couple of Stormbringers to get count, since they do give 10 count apiece, and Thunderhead I think is like 30 count or something like that. But it's not something that's super clear-cut based on how people played the PTR. Now, Ruby Life Pools as a dungeon feels very similar to Dragonflight, except there are far fewer casters just as a whole. Now, talk about trash in the first area. You got the Juggernauts. These guys do massive amounts of AoE damage and high melee damage to your tank. You have to really watch out whenever you pull a Juggernaut. We've seen some Juggernauts skipped over the course of the PTR. We've seen most of them get played, though. Another mob that matters in the first area of trash is the Chill Weaver. It has 2 casted abilities. One is just generic Bolt, and then the second one is Frost Infusion Shield, where the Frost Infusion Shield, it pulses AoE, shields the mob that the Frost Infusion is cast on. You need to kick or stop this channel to allow you to be able to kill packs off far quicker. Now, the last mob that you're kind of worried about is like the Earthshaper. They throw rocks onto people, and they are kind of the scary thing in this section. The rock dot will stack up, and actually it normally puts someone at around 50% HP before another ability kills them. That's the level of lethality that kind of happens in the first area, is this untelegraphed rock that gets thrown onto players periodically and puts a pretty scary dot onto them. So you have to be watching out for that. But say you deal with all of that, you have the mini-boss that you need to kill off before you make it into the first boss. Draghar. He is really annoying now. If you remember him from Dragonflight, you would pull him into the boss room, but that is
دقیقا میتونست برش رو باس الان بستن.
no longer the case. There is a firewall up, so Draghar has this nice feature where now he dashes and accidentally pulls additional mobs. I would say that for the normal pug group, you should try to clear out a bunch of the trash that is around Draghar. That way, unexpected pulling from his telegraph dash doesn't happen. Basically, you want to clear out most of this bottom area trash to begin with, and so pulling it on your own terms as opposed to letting Draghar dash into them is normally going to be beneficial. Okay, so Meladrusa Chillworm. She is a pretty easy fight, all things considered, to the point where a lot of teams are actually stepping on eggs for funnel. But if you end up walking on the eggs before the fight starts, that can engage the fight if you're not careful. And the fight kind of goes as follows. You really want to stack loosely.
ببینیم کجا چه خبره. پیریم هم یه چک بکنم. اجازه بده. چطوری اردیا؟ بهت خیرم 500 700 کی دادش اول تیر فول اچ سی اون رنجه. داداش میج خیلی قویه. میج الان تاپ آرکینش. مطمئنا شما این حرفی که میزنی یه فلجی دیدی.
For hail burst bombs, and stacking is pretty nice as it keeps the room's clutter to a minimum. You need to get out of the group whenever you're dropping the chill storm AoE, and every 66 and 33% the boss
الان میج آرکینه برای آرنس بیشتر بیشتر دمیج اون دوتا
is going to go into an overload cast, which has a really long cast time, and you'll see it, the telegraphing on it. You press a defensive and you try to break the shield ASAP on the 66.
غیر از هانتر آگ و devastation تقریبا بقیه که اصلا میشه پیدا داد. نریال فیوری
3% overload cast.
ما واسم
So
نفهم
we kill her off,
بعدی.
we make it on to the upper ring. Teams tend to go right straight off the rip and do a Cinder Weaver pack into the first Destroyer. The Destroyers are the dangerous mobs in this upper ring where they're Inferno cast. is pretty dangerous. They're actually quite a bit less dangerous with the Fiery Blast targeted tank bolt, even though it sounds sketchy. I've seen Blood DKs basically take that without any damage. So it's like one of those things that you're kind of worried about the Inferno AoE dot. Now, the Cinder Weavers that are in this first area are very dangerous. They cast Cinder Bolts, and they put a debuff onto you that will knock you up. Both are very dangerous, and this is especially true whenever it's combined with the Inferno dot. There's also another mob that does an ability called Flame Dance. This ability will kill the tank off rather quickly. It does infinite damage to the tanks and needs to be CC'd. It's just a channeled bolt spam every like 0.5 seconds onto the tank. Again, any CC on it, whether it be Death Grip, whether it be Typhoon, whether it be Incapacitating Roar, whether it be Blind, whatever it may be, any CC on it is valuable. Now, another mob is Flame Gallet. He's back. He doesn't really do anything until he hits 50% HP. Once he reaches 50% HP, he starts pulsing on your group for AoE damage, stacking up to 10 times. Now, normally, most groups actually pull him with the Destroyer that's near him, and you hard focus the Destroyer, making sure that's killed off before Flame Gallet hits 50% HP. The other dragon in the top is Thunderhead, and he puts out 2 lightning charge debuffs on players at the exact same time. Whenever you dispel one, it puts a dot onto players for 8 seconds, meaning that you need to like frame one dispel it, because otherwise if you don't frame one dispel the Thunderhead dot, then you'll get 2 stacks of this 8-second long lightning debuff, and it's really just dangerous. This was something that was like, again, wiping players throughout the entirety of the PTR. It's really easy to skip this guy. You can just walk around him. He no longer flies around the area. Instead, he just like walks around pathing on the ground. And so I think he's a potential skip. He's probably still likely to be skipped just with how hard he was. All right, that's the upper ring trash dealt with. We make it on to Kokia Blazehoof. She is a lot easier, I would say, than she used to be. Most of the damage in the past were from her ads casting Inferno onto you and basically killing you. She also previously had ads that you need to be very conscious about kick lockout on to make sure they didn't get 2 Inferno casts off. That's no longer a thing. Now, basically, on a higher level, you're actually going to pretty regularly get 2 Inferno casts off. So if you're on a high level, you actually cleave off the boss more to get the boss killed off in time. But if you're on, say, like a weekly level, you're going to hard focus the ads to make sure that you don't get the second Inferno cast off. Beyond that, it's kind of like you want to bait the boulder, watching out for pebbles, otherwise the boulder's going to explode early. And something that's notable is that the tank can actually AMS every tank frontal. It's the exact timer, though. This is relevant if Blood is meta. Obviously not super relevant if Blood DK doesn't become meta. But it's just something that I've brought to you guys. Now, the end section of this dungeon, this is where the difficulty actually gets pretty ramped up. I would say it's really hard, mostly due to damage intake, where a couple of mobs here are pretty tough. The mob that is the hardest, though, is the Tempest Channeler. The Tempest Channeler, she does a targeted zap onto players and pulsing AoE. This, in combination with Cinder Weavers and random other AoE damage that's happening in this area, can take players out fairly quickly. The other mob that's kind of notable in this area is the mini-boss that's required to spawn Araka and Urquhart, which is High Channeler Ravati. She's a mini-boss. She periodically shields herself, and if the shield is not broken, then it will stun your entire group. Now, I've noticed that on like 18s and 19s, this shield is very hard to break. Whenever we were doing like 15s or weekly key level, the shield was really easy, fairly trivial, but if you're doing a super high level dungeon, you need to carefully allocate offensive cooldowns to make sure that shield gets broken to where your entire group doesn't get stunned for 5 seconds. Now, last boss, Kairaka and Urquhart. Way easier than Dragonflight. The Inferno Spit just does way less damage. Now, you do still get hit by Inferno Spit by Kairaka. It drops puddles on the ground, and these puddles end up getting pushed by the wind. You previously would be super cognizant of like where you were dropping the fire to make sure that it normally would get pushed towards an edge. This is a little bit less relevant now. I will say Kairaka, whenever she lands on the ground and does her Inferno cast, she lands...
لحظة. احتمال نرفش هستا از جهتی خب اینم هست.
nearest to the largest clump of players, and so making sure that you as like a 5-stack are playing kind of close to one another to where Kairaka is always baited on top of Urquhart to where you're able to get the cleave is super valuable. Now Urquhart, She does an AoE interrupting shout. It's called Interrupting Cloudburst. It's really annoying. It does a medium amount of AoE damage. And whenever Urquhart or Karaka both hit 40%, Urquhart will mount up and get on top of Karaka, resetting aggro. Now, this there's a kind of a weird bug that's going on where Urquhart will ignore taunt on pull in P1 as well for a few seconds. The resetting aggro and the ignoring taunt on pull in P1 for a few seconds is like a really weird bug. And so as a tank, you have to be super aware of these things. Let's say you made it to P2. In P2, there's a pretty sketchy overlap with the Interrupting Shout AoE and the Inferno Spit. You really need to be diligent about using defenses on the Interrupting Cloudburst cast. That's most of where the damage is going to be coming from. The Inferno Spit is going to be like a fairly low ticking damage. But I will say, if you ever have the overlap where you have the Inferno Spit on your character and the Interrupting Cloudburst is going off, you need to press like your biggest defensive and potentially even health pot to make sure you're at 100% HP before it goes off. Next up, we got Temple of Sethraliss, where Temple, similar to Ruby and King's Rest, it actually requires most of the mobs in the dungeon to be pulled. You can skip, I don't know, 3 packs max, I would say. You can actually look in MDT for yourself to see exactly how many mobs you can skip, but you're pulling more mobs than you would guess. There's been about 75% of my runs have missed count in Temple of Sethraliss. Now let's talk about the first area trash. The first pull of this dungeon tends to be really hard, and people like to pull big since they're bloodlusting this pull. I think that especially early on, if your main objective is to just walk through the dungeon and have a 0% chance of depleting the key, you can actually break up the first pull into 2 separate pulls. But a lot of teams end up taking this first pack of trash, running all the way down the hallway, and end up pulling it into one of the big guys. And so the big guys that I'm referencing are the Sand Fury Stonefist. They have an ability called Ground Pound, which is a massive AoE hit. It hits you for probably somewhere between 50 to 75% of your HP, depending on the dungeon level. The other mobs that are in this first area that are relevant, the most notable one is actually the Sandswept Hunter, where it has an ability called Arrow Barrage, which is a 10-second channeled hit onto your player. These mobs need to be CC'd. Anything like, Death Grip, Typhoon, Wing Buffet, Blast Wave, trying to get these mobs gather into the first pull is super valuable. And if a hunter gets stuck 40 yards channeling onto a player and they don't get CC'd, it's very likely that that player will be super low right before the Stone Fist Ground Pound AoE hit goes off. The only other mob that's in this first area that's relevant is the Shrouded Fangs. They need to be kicked, otherwise they're going to stun your tank. They're not hard, it's just a required kick. All right, you kill off the first area of trash. You make it to the first boss, Adderus and Aspects, where one of these ads is always going to be Storm Blessed and immune to damage. It's a rite of passage the first time that you do this boss, where you hit for a significant period of time into the one that's immune. You need to be making sure that you're not hitting into the one that's immune. Adderus always starts as the boss that is vulnerable. That should be the one that's targeted on pull, and I think it's like a 45 or 50 second long phase where Adderus is not shielded by the Storm Blessed. Now this fight is very easy, where you basically just drop the Tempest Winds off to the side, you get pushed back by the Gale Force occasionally, and then you have to group soak a circle. The hard part of this fight is whenever you get pushed back by the Tempest Winds, making sure that you get back in melee range to be able to soak the circle on the entire party. The common strategy is just run back into melee and bring the circle into melee of the boss. Now, second area trash. I would say the second area trash is actually pretty high damage intake all around. Poison dispels are especially nice in here, so you have something like Poison Cleansing Totem or a couple of poison dispels from like a monk and a Holy Paladin, for example. Poison dispels in here are great. And the reason for this is the Poisonous Vipers, where they put random poisons onto players. They are kind of littered throughout this area. It's not like a targeted interruptible cast, it's just something that randomly happens. Another kind of main source of damage is from the Riders. They spawn many Crowlusks, and these dudes dash you and bleed you periodically. This, in combination with the Poisonous Vipers poison, that's where people actually start to get in trouble if they have both debuffs on them at the exact same time. And the last mob that's relevant in the second area is the Faithless Subjugator. This is a required kick. It has an ability called Addled Mind. It will stun you as like a channel if the cast resolves. So either kick it or use a stop the moment that the Addled Mind cast resolves. Second boss, Merektha. I don't think she's hard, but I think she's kind of like a noob check. The first mechanic that you have to know is that you need to CC the Knot of Snakes. This will break players out of the 20-second long stun. You don't really want to kill these off. Instead, you just using things like stuns or incapacitates or whatever to break the fixate from the Knot of Snakes to summon all of the snakes that are required is easy. Then the boss, after 50-ish seconds, she burrows and goes into an intermission. So you really want to prioritize doing boss damage to be able to skip phases. If you can kill the boss off in only 2 up phases as opposed to 3, you can actually save yourself somewhere in the order of about 45 seconds on your timer. Now, this is where the noob check comes in. Getting ran over by the boss during the intermission is a very common thing that happens, mostly due to the fact that you're sitting there as a DPS and you're
الان
focused on
دورش
DPSing down these 4 mobs to get
نشون.
Marektha back out from her burrow. In the process, you're not really looking at where Marektha is moving towards around the room. Whenever she stops and is starting to go through the middle of the room, she actually targets a player and moves towards them. This means that most people want to be standing near to the middle of the room. That way you have the most time possible to be able to determine where is Marektha coming from, who is she targeting, and where do I need to move. All right, we kill off Marektha. We make it to the 3rd area. We have 2 mobs that are in this area that are dangerous. First one is the Agitated Nimbus. It and the Static Anomaly are the dangerous mobs, especially only when they're dealing damage together. The Nimbus casts an ability called Release Charge, and it will do like an accelerated charge ability, which can be spell stolen or purged. If you spell steal it or purge it, then the Nimbus does not cast Release Charge at all, and so I think that having a purge in this dungeon is very valuable, similar to the Poison Dispel. But say, hypothetically, the Nimbus Release Charge is going off. You need to defensive this, especially if you also have the anomalies casting leap onto players. Actually, it's not even a casted leap. It's just a random leap that's on the players. Kind of the iconic boss of this dungeon, Galvast, where this is not the same Galvast that you once knew. You really want to tank this boss along the wall, and you can actually position and move the boss in a way where
عوض شده.
people can actually soak 2 or potentially even 3 beams at once if they have immunities. This is not normally the best strategy because it does a lot of damage to you, but I think pivoting into a 3-point triangle, it actually makes the strategy on this fight fairly easy since only 3 puddles go out at a time. Then the tank moves the boss like clockwise around the wall to be able to drop the big pollution puddles. And as for the pillars, you just soak the pillars. You don't let your tank soak the pillars as he takes increased melee damage whenever he's soaking. Okay, so last trash area. The old ball gauntlet is completely gone. The one that bugged out the MDI that everybody thinks of is no longer in the game. Instead, you stand on these shrines and you charge them up. At 50% on the shrine, you get 2 disruptors that come out. You can CC them. Now, the CC is actually kind of interesting because, as you can see on screen right here, what we do is we slam down a cage on the far side disruptor, and then we just chain either Death Grip or Typhoon or just any amount of CC on the near side disruptor, even like Solar Beam or Interrupts, and you just stand on top of the shrine, and you do not kill disruptors off. If you had to kill off the disruptors, this would take a really long time. The other mob that's in this last trash area is the Orb Watcher, and this mob does a lot of AoE damage. All right, last boss. Last boss is one of the bosses of all time, where it's Trash, the boss, where you just kill trash mobs the entire time. Whenever you kill off these trash mobs, they will drop a Condensed Life Force Orb. You want to soak the Condensed Life Force Orb, but not too quickly, where if you have 2 hits of the Condensed Life Force Orb go off while you still have the debuff from the first hit, it's just going to wipe you. It's going to kill your entire group. You can actually do something that's kind of nice where you can soak one and then let the other one go off naturally. That way nobody has to worry about dealing with them. So maybe this is a healer job. Maybe this ends up being a tank job. And you just, as a DPS, you kind of steer clear of these Condensed Life Force Orbs. But you need to actually soak them because they do a large percentage of the healing to the boss. Because another main mechanic of this fight is that the healer should try to heal the boss during the intermission whenever the boss is available to be healed. But at the same time, killing ads in this phase actually does the most amount of healing to the boss, and you can actually kill a dynamic amount of waves of ads depending on how fast you're killing them. So the difference between getting 2 waves of ads during the intermission versus 3 waves of ads during the intermission is an insane amount of healing that goes into the fight, making damage actually super relevant. Now, something that's actually kind of notable is that you end up with 2 of these phases anyways on this last boss, so it's probably not worth saving Lust over. I don't know where you're kind of supposed to Bloodlust in this dungeon, but Bloodlusting the last boss does not feel great just in general. The last tip is don't let the Tormentors hit your healer. They're fixated onto your healer, and of course you don't want them to get meleeed, but if they do get meleeed, then they get a healing down, which is not very good. Okay, talking about a dungeon that nobody outside of the PTR has done, Altar of Fangs. Altar of Fangs, the first area is actually quite hard. The main premise of the first area is that you're going to have to click 5 totems before you're able to jump downstairs and fight the first boss. And the mobs in the first area are the reason that the first area is quite hard, where the first mob is the Ravenous Decadent. This is a mob that has a stacking enrage, where melee swings will stack up to 20 times. It's a 2-second long enrage. You need to time your AoE CC properly to make sure that your tank can actually get a reset, otherwise they're just going to get meleeed to death by these mobs. Another mob that's actually kind of dangerous in this first area is a Primal Serpent. It's actually quite easy, but it has a required kick. Failure to kick this will give you a 30% haste down. Actually, the initial hit of this AoE as well also wipe you if you're not careful or if you're not topped. The Twin Fang Harrowers, these
بله نمیدونم داداش. تانک DPS هیل هنوز تصمیمم قطعی نشده چیکار میخوام بکنم. تا همین هفته اول مشخص میشه دورت بگم.
are these like big wyvern dragon looking mobs. The main ability that's dangerous on them is the paralyzing shots. It's an AoE dot that also has initial hit damage. They do also have a spinning frontal. A notable thing about these mobs is that movement speed clearing effects will remove the debuff, the paralyzing shots debuff. Also, if you pull 2 dragons at once, they have the anti-sync, force to desync technology on them. But they're very dangerous when pulled with the Ritual Chieftain, which is the other mob that's in this area, where
قشنگ میرم غذا میخورم و یه چیزی میذارم به اصطلاح اسم چیه همین میذارم غذا میخورم میبینم لینکش بچه براتون گذاشتم یه هر کی خواست بره ببینه من با موبایل میبینم و به غذا